The carriage appeared on the bend of the dusty road like a ghostly apparition, its wheels groaning in protest against the weight of neglect. Victoria Ashworth looked up from the flower beds she was trying to clear alone, her hands covered in soil, and felt her heart clench. Visitors had been rare since Edmund's death 8 months ago. Thornfield Manor, once prosperous in Somerset County, now mirrored the grief that consumed her. But it wasn't a visiting carriage. It was old, battered, and stopped erratically near the main gate. No one disembarked. Victoria wiped her hands on her worn apron and walked cautiously towards the vehicle. The silence weighed heavily in the September afternoon air, broken only by the distant song of a thrush. It was then that she saw him. A man had collapsed beside the rear wheel, his thin coat torn, dark bloodstains contrasting with the light grey fabric. His brown hair was dishevelled and even unconscious. His face held an expression of torment. Victoria knelt beside him, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. He was alive, wounded, exhausted, but alive. She observed his aristocratic features, his hands which, despite the dirt, revealed someone unfamiliar with manual labor until recently. A gentleman fallen from grace, she concluded. "Sir?" Her voice sounded firm, though fear coursed through her veins. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, grey like a stormy sky. They focused on her with difficulty, confused, then filled with something she recognized immediately. Despair. Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, cultivated, confirming her suspicions about his origins. "Thornfield Manor in Somerset. I am Victoria Ashworth. You are injured." He tried to rise, but groaned in pain, bringing a hand to his left side over his ribs. "I need to. Keep going. I cannot." "You're not going anywhere in this condition." Victoria was surprised by her own resolve. There was something about the man that stirred in her not just compassion, but a sense of urgency she didn't entirely comprehend. "Come. I can at least clean your wounds and offer you a meal." The hesitation in his eyes was palpable, as if he were weighing invisible risks. Finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. With effort, Victoria helped him to his feet. He was taller than she had imagined, and his weight against her brought a strange awareness of how lonely she had been. Together, they stumbled towards the entrance of the property. "Mama!" Margaret's high-pitched voice echoed from the doorway. At 6 years old, her eldest daughter's eyes were wide with curiosity. Behind her, Charlotte, barely 4 years old, clutched her sister's skirt with one hand, the thumb of the other firmly in her mouth. "Margaret, fetch some clean water and rags. Charlotte, dear, stay put." Victoria guided the stranger to the kitchen, settling him onto a wooden chair by the table. The room was modest but clean, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and a fireplace where a pot simmered slowly. Margaret returned with the water, her brown eyes fixed on the injured man. "Is he going to stay, Mama? Like Mr. Pemberton when he hurt his leg in the barn?" "For tonight, at least." Victoria began to carefully clean the man's side wound, a deep laceration that, by the looks of it, had needed stitches days ago. It was infected. "I'll need to cauterize this." "No." The word came out firm, despite his obvious agony. Just clean it. I've been through worse." Victoria studied him as she worked. There was an entire story written in the tension of his face, in the scars she was beginning to notice, in the way his eyes continually scanned the door, as if expecting pursuers. "What is your name?" she asked softly. The pause was too long. "Robert. Just Robert." "Well, just Robert. I've been a widow for 8 months. My husband Edmund left me this estate and more debts than I knew existed. We have 3 tenants who barely manage to pay their rents, and I've been cultivating what I can myself to feed my daughters." She didn't know why she was telling him all this, perhaps because a stranger was safer than the pitying glances of neighbors. "So, I have nothing worth stealing if that's what concerned you." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I am no thief. I didn't say you were, but you're clearly someone on the run." Robert's gaze shifted to where Margaret watched, fascinated, as Charlotte timidly approached. The younger girl had Edmund's blonde curls, while Margaret had inherited Victoria's brown hair. "They are lovely." His voice softened imperceptibly. Lucky to have such a courageous mother. Courage or folly, sometimes I can't tell the difference. Victoria finished cleaning the wound and prepared a poultice with the herbs she kept. This place needs a man. The repairs are beyond my capabilities. The barn roof leaks, the fences are falling down, and there's an entire field I haven't been able to plough before winter. She looked at him directly. You need a home, even if temporary, and I need someone strong enough to help save this property before we lose it entirely. I cannot pay. Robert closed his eyes briefly. I have nothing. I didn't ask for payment. I asked for work. And while you work, you will have a roof, food, and safety. Whatever you are running from, I doubt they'll look for a farmhand in Somerset. The offer hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Victoria saw the internal struggle reflected in his expression. Robert had been someone important, that was evident. But something had utterly destroyed him, reducing him to that wounded, desperate man in her kitchen. "Why would you do this?" he asked finally, his voice heavy with suspicion. "You don't know me." "Because I recognize despair when I see it, and because my daughters deserve a chance to keep their home." Victoria straightened, crossing her arms. "Stay tonight. Tomorrow, if you are still here, I will show you what needs to be done." Margaret approached, her small footsteps loud in the silence. "Are you going to be our new papa?" "Margaret!" Victoria blushed intensely. But Robert didn't seem offended. On the contrary, something painful and ancient crossed his face. "No, little one. Just someone helping your mother for a while." Charlotte, braver now, released her sister and lightly touched Robert's knee. "You're hurt. Mama fixes everything that's broken. She fixed my doll." Robert's expression then transformed, a raw vulnerability replacing his defensive reserve. He looked at Victoria with eyes that suddenly seemed to truly see, not just watch. "I don't know if everything can be fixed." "Not with that attitude." Victoria served him a bowl of stew, the aroma of meat and vegetables filling the kitchen. "Eat. Afterwards you can sleep in the servants' quarters. Tomorrow we'll decide the rest." As Robert ate in silence, observed by the curious girls, Victoria turned to the window. Twilight painted the sky in orange hues, and for the first time in months she felt something beyond exhaustion and fear. It was hope, fragile as glass, but undeniably present. She didn't know who the man was or what demons pursued him, but she recognized in him the same fierce determination that had kept her going after Edmund's death. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could save each other from the abyss that threatened to consume them. The first light of morning filtered through the window of the small servants' room, revealing Robert already awake, sitting on the edge of the narrow cot. He hadn't been able to sleep properly. Every sound in the old manor made him start, the ghosts of his past pursuing him even there, in that unlikely refuge. He watched his hands tremble slightly and clenched his fists with determination. He needed to regain control. The wound in his ribs still pulsed with sharp pain, but it was a minor discomfort compared to the burning shame that consumed his chest. Robert Ashford Sinclair, once London's most respected magnate, owner of 3 textile factories and advisor to Parliament itself, now reduced to accepting charity from an impoverished widow. The irony was bitter as gall. He rose carefully, donning the same soiled clothes from the previous day. He possessed no others. Everything had been lost when creditors confiscated his Mayfair residence, when they discovered he had secured loans using properties already mortgaged, when the defrauded investors demanded his head. When Charles Pemberton, his partner and supposed friend, revealed himself as the true architect of his ruin, disappearing with the funds while Robert was left to face the consequences. He had fled London 2 weeks prior, narrowly escaping violent creditors who would not be satisfied with legal proceedings. The carriage he had hired with his last coins had broken down on the road, and he had walked until collapsing from exhaustion and fever near the gates of Thornfield. He had not expected to find salvation, certainly not at the hands of a woman with her own demons. Light footsteps in the corridor interrupted his thoughts. Children's voices whispered from the other side of the door. "Do you think he's still there?" That was Margaret. "Mamma said not to wake him." Charlotte replied with the seriousness of one trying to follow important rules. Robert opened the door gently, startling the girls who exchanged guilty glances. Margaret recovered first, her expression brightening. "You're better. Mama said you had a fever last night and that we shouldn't disturb you." "I am well." His voice sounded harsher than he intended. He softened his tone. "Where is your mother?" "In the barn." Margaret pointed vaguely towards the back of the property. "She's trying to fix the roof by herself again." Alarm shot through Robert. "Alone? That's dangerous." "We always say that." Charlotte shook her head with a sigh that seemed too adult for her 4 years. "But Mama doesn't listen. She says there's no one else to do it." Robert found himself walking towards the barn before consciously processing the decision. The morning air was fresh, laden with the scent of damp earth and vegetation. The property, in the clear daylight, revealed itself to be larger than he had imagined, though clearly neglected. Fences hung at precarious angles, fields lay uncultivated, and the barn itself leaned slightly to the left, like a tired old man. Victoria was on the roof, balancing precariously on a beam as she tried to reposition loose tiles. She wore a simple working dress, her brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, and even from a distance, Robert could see the tense determination in every movement. "Mrs. Ashworth," his voice echoed louder than he intended. She startled, losing her balance for a terrifying moment. Robert rushed forward, positioning himself beneath her instinctively, though he knew he couldn't adequately support her in his condition. Victoria recovered, clinging to the beam with whitened knuckles. "For heaven's sake, don't startle me like that." Her face was flushed. He couldn't discern if from fright or irritation. Probably both. "Forgive me, but what are you doing? This is dangerously reckless." Her brown eyes narrowed. "It's necessary. Winter is approaching, and if this roof isn't repaired, we'll lose all the stored hay, which means the animals I still possess will starve." "Then allow me to do it." Robert moved towards the ladder propped against the structure. "I've worked in construction before." It wasn't exactly a lie. He had supervised the construction of his factories, though he had never actually wielded a tool himself. But he had observed enough laborers to understand the basic principles. Victoria descended slowly, each step measured with care. When she finally reached the ground, she was breathless. "You can barely stand. I saw how you moved this morning, each step an agony. I can endure discomfort. What I cannot do is watch a woman risk breaking her neck out of pride." "Pride?" Her voice rose dangerously. "This isn't pride, Mr. Robert. It's survival. I have 2 daughters depending on me, tenants who rely on this property continuing to operate, and creditors who would love any excuse to confiscate everything. I don't have the luxury of waiting for a knight in shining armor." The bitterness in her words resonated with something deep within Robert. He recognized that despair, the feeling of drowning while everyone watched from the safety of the shore. "I am no knight." The admission came out quietly, laden with unspoken truths. "I am merely a man who owes a debt of gratitude for the kindness shown to me. Allow me to repay that debt." Victoria studied him for a long moment, her irritation gradually giving way to something softer. Weariness, perhaps, or recognition. "Very well, but if you fall and break something, don't blame me." Robert climbed the ladder with more difficulty than he expected, each rung pulling at the wound in his ribs, but he reached the roof and began to work, carefully removing the damaged tiles. The sun gradually rose, warming his back, and for the first time in weeks his mind quieted. There was a simplicity in physical labor, an immediacy that hadn't existed in the complex financial manipulations that had once dominated his life. Victoria remained below, passing him new tiles and tools when needed. They worked in comfortable silence, punctuated only by occasional instructions. Margaret and Charlotte eventually appeared, playing nearby as they watched with curiosity. "Your mother said you were a gentleman," Victoria commented after some time, her voice floating up to him. "Before whatever happened." Robert paused, a tile in his hands. "I was many things, none of them particularly admirable in retrospect. We all carry regrets. Mine destroyed lives." The words escaped before he could censure them. "Investors who trusted me lost everything. Workers who depended on my factories were left jobless when they were confiscated. He swallowed with difficulty. I was so focused on expanding, on proving I was the cleverest in the room, that I didn't see the betrayal before me. Or perhaps I simply didn't want to see. The silence that followed was heavy. Robert waited for judgment, repulsion. But when Victoria finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Edmund also had ambitions. He invested in schemes that promised fortunes, ignoring my warnings. When he died, I discovered he had mortgaged Thornfield 3 times, each loan hidden from the last. Creditors still appear occasionally, demanding payments for debts I never knew existed. She paused. I loved him, but I was also furious with him for leaving us in this situation. Is it possible to feel both things simultaneously? Yes. Robert looked down, meeting her eyes. It is perfectly possible. Understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared fallibility. They were not perfect people facing unjust adversities. They were flawed people trying to survive the consequences of their own and others' choices. The girls ask about him constantly. Victoria wiped away something that might have been a tear. Margaret remembers more. Charlotte was very young. Sometimes I think it's better that way, less painful. Or perhaps more so, never truly knowing the one who was lost. The day advanced as they worked. Robert completed the most urgent repairs, though he recognized that the entire roof would eventually need replacing. When he finally descended, his clothes were soaked with sweat, and the pain in his ribs was almost unbearable. But there was satisfaction in seeing the work completed. Victoria had prepared a simple meal, bread with cheese and apples from the neglected orchard. They ate together in the kitchen, the girls chattering animatedly about a bird's nest they had discovered. "Will you stay?" Victoria asked abruptly when the children had gone out to play. "I know I said only one night, but there is much work, and I fear I won't manage alone until spring." Robert ought to refuse. Each day he remained was a day his pursuers might find him, bringing danger to this family. But looking around the modest kitchen, hearing the girls' laughter outside, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Purpose. "I will stay." The words sealed something between them, a tacit agreement that transcended the simple exchange of labor for shelter, at least until the essential repairs are complete. Victoria nodded, and for the first time since he had met her, a genuine smile illuminated her face. It transformed her completely, revealing the woman she should have been before grief and struggle had hardened her. "Then, tomorrow, we'll begin with the fences of the east pasture." Robert found himself smiling in response, something he hadn't done in weeks. Perhaps he couldn't undo his past mistakes. But here, on this forgotten property in Somerset, he could at least try to build something new from the ruins of what had been. The following days established a routine Robert had never imagined possible. He woke at dawn, his body still protesting against the physical labor, but gradually strengthening. The fences of the east pasture proved a more ambitious project than he had anticipated, requiring not just repairs, but complete reconstruction in several sections. Victoria worked alongside him when she could, her delicate hands developing calluses as they held stakes and hammered nails. Margaret had become his unofficial shadow, following him across the property with insatiable curiosity. The girl possessed a keen intelligence that constantly surprised him, asking questions about construction techniques to which he improvised answers as he learned alongside her. To his surprise, she understood, her eyes shining with genuine fascination. Charlotte won him over differently, more quietly, but no less powerfully. The girl had begun to wait for him at the end of each workday, holding some treasure found during her explorations. An iridescent feather, a smooth stone from the stream, once even a frog that had to be gently returned to the pond. She placed these offerings into his hands with ritual solemnity, and Robert accepted them with equal seriousness, carefully placing them on the windowsill of his small room. Victoria observed these interactions with expressions Robert couldn't entirely decipher. Sometimes he caught something akin to gratitude in her eyes, other times a melancholy that suggested painful memories. They worked side by side daily, and his awareness of her presence had grown alarmingly. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she concentrated, the slight furrow between her brows when she calculated measurements, the surprising strength in her arms when they carried hay together. It was a Thursday, as they worked in the kitchen garden, trying to save the vegetables before the first frost, that the polished surface of their coexistence finally cracked. Margaret and Charlotte played nearby, building imaginary houses with twigs and leaves. Robert was digging beds when he heard Victoria gasp sharply. He looked up and found her holding a letter with trembling hands, her face as pale as linen. "Victoria?" He used her given name now, the formality gradually dissolving between them. "What has happened?" She did not answer immediately, her eyes scanning the written lines repeatedly, as if the words might change with enough rereading. Finally, she extended the paper to him with unsteady fingers. The letter was from a firm of solicitors in London. The legal language was dense, but the essence was devastatingly clear. The main creditor for Edmund's debts had sold all outstanding obligations to a single buyer. This new creditor demanded immediate full payment of £130, or the property would be confiscated and auctioned within 6 weeks. £130. Victoria's voice came out hollow, distant. "It might as well be 1,000. I don't even have 30 saved." Robert reread the letter, something about the wording bothering him. The transaction seemed rushed, almost predatory. "Who is this creditor? Is the name mentioned?" "Pemberton Holdings." Victoria looked at him, confused. Why does that matter? The name hit Robert like a physical blow. The blood drained from his face as the horrible understanding formed. Pemberton, Charles Pemberton. "Do you know this man?" "He is my former partner, the man who betrayed me and disappeared with the funds." The words came out harsh, each one weighing a ton. "But this cannot be a coincidence. He did not simply acquire your debts as a random business transaction." Victoria recoiled a step, realization painting itself across her face. He is doing this because of you. Your past has finally caught up to us." "You don't know that for sure." But even as he spoke, Robert knew it was true. Charles had always been meticulous, cruel in his efficiency. If he had discovered where Robert was hiding, he would not come directly. No, he would first destroy everything Robert had begun to rebuild, everyone he had made the mistake of caring for. "How did he find you?" Victoria's voice rose, anger replacing her initial shock. "You were careful, no one knew." "The men who came looking for me. They must have left information that they made inquiries here. They didn't need to be sure of my presence, just enough suspicion for Charles to investigate." Robert ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt consuming him. "He is using you to force me out of hiding. He knows I wouldn't allow you to suffer because of me." "Wouldn't allow it?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "But we are already suffering, Mr. Sinclair. My property will be confiscated. My daughters will lose their home. And all because I was foolish enough to show compassion to a stranger." The words cut more deeply than any blade. Robert forced himself to meet her eyes, seeing the betrayal reflected in them. "You are right. This is my fault. And I will set it right." "How?" "Do you have £130 hidden in your tattered coat?" The sarcasm was a defense against the panic he saw threatening to consume her. "No. But I can remove the reason for Charles to hold these debts." Robert straightened, the decision forming even as every instinct screamed against it. "If I leave, if I surrender myself to the authorities, there will be no more purpose in punishing you. He will sell the debts again, probably for less, and you will have time to find a solution." "Surrender yourself." Victoria looked at him as if he had gone mad. "You will be imprisoned, tried, possibly hanged if the charges are grave enough. It is better than seeing you lose everything, seeing Margaret and Charlotte evicted from their home." The certainty in his voice surprised them both. "In the past weeks I have known more peace and purpose than in years in London. I owe you this. I owe your daughters." "No." The word came out firm, definitive. Victoria crossed her arms, her jaw tense with a determination he had come to recognize. "I will not allow you to sacrifice yourself for us. There must be another way." "What way?" "You cannot produce such an amount in 6 weeks. Even if we sell everything of value, it would not be enough." Margaret chose that moment to approach, Charlotte holding her hand. The older girl looked between the adults with eyes that were too perceptive. "Mamma, why are you arguing?" Victoria quickly knelt, composing a calm expression that did not reach her eyes. "We are not arguing, darling. Just discussing adult matters." "Is it because of the letter?" Margaret looked at the paper still in Robert's hand. "Bad news." "Nothing you need to worry about." Robert forced a smile, tucking the letter into his pocket. "Your mother and I will sort everything out." But Margaret was not easily fooled. She studied them both with disconcerting intensity before nodding slowly. "You aren't leaving, are you? You promised to fix the south pasture gate." The simplicity of the statement, the trust implicit in it, squeezed something in his chest. Robert looked at Victoria over the girls' heads, a silent conversation passing between them. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, a plea and a command simultaneously. "I am not going anywhere." The words came out before he could censor them. "I promise." That night, after the girls were asleep, Victoria found Robert in the barn, where he had pretended to check the tools, unable to face the false normality of the house. She entered silently, carrying a lamp that cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls. "We need a plan." It was not a request, it was a statement. And fleeing or surrendering are not acceptable options. Robert turned to face her, the golden light making her almost ethereal. "Victoria, be reasonable. There is no way to—" £130. She interrupted him, beginning to pace as she thought aloud. "A fortune for us, but not an impossible sum in the grand scheme. There is the autumn harvest still to sell. Edmund's tools that I kept, some have value. And there are—" She paused, something painful crossing her face. "There are my family jewels. My mother left me pieces I saved for the girls, but necessity trumps sentimentalism. You cannot sell your daughter's inheritances." "I can and I will if it means keeping their home." She faced him defiantly. "But even all that will not be enough. We need more time or more money, ideally both." Robert forced himself to think, pushing panic and guilt aside. Years negotiating complex deals, navigating intricate financial politics, must serve for something. The letter mentions 6 weeks before legal action. That is standard time in debt enforcement cases, but it can be extended if you demonstrate ability for partial payment. How much partial? Traditionally, 30% shows good faith, approximately £40 in your case. He calculated quickly. It is not a small sum, but combining the harvest, the tools, perhaps some less sentimental jewels, it could be achievable. Hope lit up in Victoria's eyes. "And if we get that amount, we will have more time?" "Potentially, although—" He hesitated, hating to destroy that fragile optimism. Although Charles might simply refuse. Legally, he is entitled to the full amount. "But he also has a business reputation to maintain, does he not?" Victoria approached, the lamp revealing the determination etched in every line of her face. Even unscrupulous men need to keep up appearances. Refusing a good faith arrangement would seem predatory, especially against a widow. Admiration blossomed in Robert. She immediately understood the social dynamics at play, the pressures that could be applied even in a desperate situation. "You are right. And if we go further, if we create witnesses for your good faith attempt, the local magistrate, perhaps the parish priest, then Charles would be forced to accept or look like a monster." Victoria nodded slowly. "It doesn't eliminate the debt, but it buys time. And time is all we need." Robert felt strategic planning return, the mental clarity that had been his greatest strength before his fall. "With more weeks, I can finish the major repairs. The property will be worth more, making a sale or mortgage more favorable, and perhaps—" He paused, a dangerous idea forming. "Perhaps I can make some discreet inquiries. Charles disappeared with considerable funds. He must have invested them somewhere under some name. If I find proof of his fraud, you could clear your name." Victoria completed the thought. "And a man facing his own exposure would be less inclined to pursue petty vendettas." They looked at each other in the flickering light, the impossibility of their situation suddenly seeming less absolute. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a path where before there had only been despair. "Why are you doing this?" Robert asked softly. "It would be simpler to accept my offer to leave. It would remove complication from your lives." Victoria stood quietly for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of carefully guarded truths. Because my daughters laugh again. Because for the first time since Edmund died, I don't face each day alone. And because... She raised her eyes to meet his. Because I believe you deserve a chance to prove you are not just your mistakes. The vulnerability in those words, the implicit trust, disarmed Robert completely. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, intertwining his calloused fingers with hers. I will not disappoint you, I promise. Victoria squeezed his hand in response, a silent seal of alliance that transcended words. They remained like that for a suspended moment, aware of the invisible line they had just crossed. Finally, she pulled back, breaking the contact but not the connection. Tomorrow we will begin. The harvest first, then we will evaluate everything of value and you. She paused meaningfully. You will begin making those discreet inquiries about your former partner. It will be dangerous. Everything worth having usually is. A small smile touched her lips. Good night, Robert. Good night, Victoria. She left, leaving him alone in the growing darkness as the lamp moved away. Robert remained still, feeling a renewed weight of purpose settling upon his shoulders. It was not just about survival now. It was about protection, about building, about becoming a man worthy of the faith Victoria had placed in him. The past had finally caught up to them, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could face it together and win. The following morning brought a biting cold that heralded the approach of winter. Robert woke before dawn, his mind already working on the multiple challenges that awaited them. He dressed quickly, ignoring the persistent protest of his still tender ribs, and found Victoria already in the kitchen, preparing oatmeal while the girls still slept upstairs. Couldn't you sleep either? She asked without turning, as if she had developed a special sense for his presence. A few hours. Robert approached the table where she had laid out paper and a quill, numbers scrawled in an uneven column. Have you taken inventory? I tried. The frustration was evident in her voice. Even being generous with my estimates, I cannot reach £40. Edmund's tools might be worth 15. The autumn harvest, if we get a good price at the Bath market, another 12. The jewels. Her voice faltered slightly. Perhaps 10, possibly less. No one pays fair value for pieces sold out of desperation. Robert studied the numbers, mentally confirming her calculations. £37 in the best-case scenario. Insufficient. What about the property itself? Some of the leases? They are already mortgaged as collateral for the original debts. Selling them would only transfer the problem. Victoria finally turned to face him, her eyes shadowed by a sleepless night. We need an additional source, something we haven't considered. An idea had begun to form in Robert's mind during the sleepless hours. Dangerous but potentially lucrative. He hesitated, knowing Victoria would initially resist. There is something I possess, not physically, but in knowledge. Explain yourself. Before everything collapsed, I was negotiating a contract for textile supply with a consortium of merchants in Bristol. The agreement was never finalized due to the collapse of my factories, but the terms were exceptionally favorable. Information about wool prices, transport routes, specific contacts. He watched her carefully. That knowledge is worth money to the right merchants. Victoria frowned. You are not suggesting selling trade secrets. They are not secrets. They are legitimate contacts and market knowledge that anyone could theoretically discover with enough effort. I am simply offering a shortcut. He leaned against the table. I know 3 merchants in Bath who would pay well for appropriate introductions and information on market timing. And if Charles discovers you are in Bath conducting business, it would not exactly be discreet. That is why I won't go. Robert met her eyes. You will go. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Victoria crossed her arms, her stance defensive. Me? I understand nothing of textile trade. You don't need to. You just need to deliver information I prepare and negotiate a price. He began to pace, nervous energy demanding movement. You will say you are a widow from a rural estate, seeking to diversify investments. It is perfectly acceptable, especially for a woman in your circumstances. And Charles has no reason to watch your movements. Victoria processed this slowly. He could see objections forming and being discarded as she weighed the proposal. How much would such information be worth? To the right merchants? Easily £10, possibly 15 if you negotiate firmly. He paused. Combined with the rest, it would be enough for a partial payment. And then, when we face Charles or his representatives with the £40, the question was practical, forcing them to look beyond the immediate solution. Then we begin phase 2. I need to travel to London. The words came out before he could reconsider them. Discreetly, using old contacts who still owe me loyalty, Charles left traces, I'm sure of it. Men like him always do. I just need to find them. London. Victoria pronounced the word like a sentence. Where everyone is looking for you, where prison awaits if you are recognized. That is why I will be careful. I will change my appearance, use a false name, move only at night between trusted contacts. He saw the fear in her eyes and softened his tone. Victoria, it is our only real hope. Partial payment buys time, but it does not solve the fundamental problem. We need leverage against Charles, and that means proving that he, not I, was the true architect of the fraud. And if you fail, if you are captured? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken consequences. Robert forced himself to maintain eye contact. Then at least you will have the time bought by the partial payment. You can sell the property on more favorable terms. Establish yourselves elsewhere with the girls. You speak as if your capture were a minor eventuality. Victoria's voice trembled slightly. As if it didn't matter. It matters. The admission came out quiet, laden with a truth he had barely begun to recognize. But your daughters matter more. This property, your future, matter more. I made selfish choices for years, placing ambition above all else. Let me make a different choice now. Victoria turned abruptly, walking to the window where the growing light was beginning to paint the garden in golden hues. She remained there for a long moment, her shoulders tense beneath her wool shawl. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm, controlled. Very well, but with conditions. She turned to face him. You will prepare the information for Bath, but you will also teach me enough so that I understand what I am selling. I will not be a mere ignorant messenger. And London. She paused, something determined solidifying in her expression. London will happen only if the partial payment is accepted, and we have confirmation of additional time. You will not risk your freedom rashly. The gratitude Robert felt was almost overwhelming. He nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Victoria approached, stopping just inches from him, close enough that he felt the warmth of her presence. Promise me something. Her eyes sought his, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. Promise me you will not do anything imprudent, that you will not sacrifice yourself unnecessarily thinking you are protecting us. Victoria. A promise, Robert. I need to hear it. He held her hands, the rough calluses against her skin a constant reminder of all she had endured. I promise I will be careful, that I will not take unnecessary risks, and that— He hesitated, then continued. And that I will return. No matter what happens, I will find a way to return. She squeezed his hands briefly before pulling back, the mask of composure returning. But something had changed between them, a tacit understanding that needed no words. They were beyond a simple transactional agreement now, bound by something deeper and infinitely more dangerous. The sound of small footsteps upstairs broke the moment. Margaret would appear soon, followed by Charlotte, and they would need to maintain appearances of normality for the girls. Victoria moved efficiently, serving oatmeal into bowls while Robert began to organize the papers on the table. When Margaret came downstairs, yawning, she found a deceptively peaceful scene of domesticity. Victoria serving breakfast, Robert reviewing papers as if he were planning just another day's work on the estate. The girl studied them both with her too perceptive eyes, but apparently decided to accept the facade. Charlotte followed moments later, her blonde hair disheveled from sleep. She dragged her chair close to Robert, as she had made a habit of doing, and watched him eat with the concentrated seriousness peculiar to small children. "Mr. Robert?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Mamma seems sad today. Did you do something to upset her?" The question, delivered with complete innocence, hit Robert with unexpected force. He exchanged a quick glance with Victoria, seeing his own guilt reflected in her eyes. "No, little one." He lowered himself to Charlotte's level. "Your mother is just worried about adult responsibilities, but we are working together to sort everything out. There's nothing for you to worry about. Do you promise?" Charlotte extended her pinky finger, a gesture Margaret had evidently taught her to seal important promises. Robert entwined his finger with hers, the childish ritual carrying the weight of a solemn oath. "I promise." Margaret watched the exchange with a thoughtful expression beyond her years. "When Papa worried, he tried to hide it from us too. But we always knew." She looked directly at Robert. "It's better when adults tell the truth, even if it's scary." Victoria sat down abruptly, pulling Margaret onto her lap despite the girl becoming too big for such comfort. "You are right, darling. So here is the truth. The property faces financial difficulties. People your father owed money to are demanding payment, but Mr. Robert and I have a plan to deal with it." "Are we going to lose our home?" Margaret's voice was small, frightened in a way that broke the heart. "Not if we can help it." Robert spoke with a conviction he almost believed. "And we will do everything in our power to prevent it. Does that sound fair to you?" Margaret nodded slowly, processing the information with gratifying seriousness. Charlotte, less comprehending the details but grasping the emotional tone, simply pressed herself closer to Robert, offering comfort in her own silent way. They finished breakfast in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Afterwards, while Victoria took the girls for their daily lessons, Robert returned to the papers, beginning to meticulously document all commercial information that might have value: names, dates, prices, transport routes, peculiarities of specific merchants. Everything that could be monetized without compromising ethics. Victoria returned hours later, finding him surrounded by pages covered in his elegant handwriting. She studied his work in silence before nodding approvingly. "When will we leave for Bath?" "Tomorrow would be ideal. The sooner we secure the funds, the more time we will have to prepare a presentation for Charles's representatives." He looked out the window where the sun was beginning to set. "You will need an appropriate dress. Merchants respond better to appearances of prosperity." "I have a mourning dress that Edmund bought for formal occasions. I rarely wore it. It remains in good condition." Something vulnerable crossed her face. "It will be strange." Wearing clothes he chose while working to save what he almost destroyed. Robert stood, moving to her. "Edmund made mistakes, but he also loved you and the girls. Those things do not cancel each other out. People are complex, capable of great love and great failure simultaneously." "Like you?" The words were not an accusation, merely an observation. "Like me," he agreed. "Like all of us, eventually." Victoria held his arm briefly, a gesture of understanding and solidarity. Then she pulled away, returning to the practicality that would keep them focused. "So, tomorrow, Bath. And then, depending on what we achieve, the next step." "The next step," Robert echoed, both carefully not naming what that might mean. That night, after the girls were asleep, Robert remained awake in his small room, mentally reviewing every detail of the plan. The risks were considerable, the chances of success uncertain. But for the first time since his fall, he was fighting for something beyond mere survival. He was fighting for a family, for a home, for a future he had begun to imagine against all good sense. And if that required facing demons he had spent weeks fleeing, then so be it. The journey to Bath consumed the entire morning, the old carriage protesting against every irregularity of the road. Victoria remained silent, her fingers nervously smoothing the folds of the morning dress she hadn't worn in months. The superior quality black fabric sharply contrasted with the simple work dresses that had become her daily uniform. Robert watched her from the opposite seat, conscious of the transformation the attire wrought. She seemed once again the lady she had probably been before widowhood forced her to work the land with her own hands. Margaret and Charlotte were left in the care of Mrs. Dawson, wife of one of the tenants, who occasionally helped when needed. The separation, even temporary, clearly weighed on Victoria. She had looked back 3 times before the carriage disappeared from Thornfield's sight. "They will be fine," Robert offered gently. "Mrs. Dawson raised 5 children of her own." "I know that." Victoria forced a tense smile. "But it's the first time I've left them since. Since Edmund. The admission revealed more than she probably intended. In the 8 months since her husband's death, Victoria had not allowed herself even a brief respite from the weight of responsibilities. No social visits, no moment of frivolity, just relentless survival. Then perhaps this is not just necessary business, Robert suggested carefully, but also a reminder that you are still a person beyond a mother and a protector of property. Victoria turned to the window, but not before he caught something vulnerable in her expression. I don't know if I remember how to be that person. The conversation died there, both lost in thought as Bath gradually revealed itself. The spa town displayed its best autumnal finery, the elegant Georgian buildings gleaming under intermittent sun. Fine carriages traversed wide streets, ladies and gentlemen in expensive attire strolling through the public gardens. It was a world completely different from the rural life Robert had embraced in recent weeks. They stopped at a modest but respectable inn near the commercial district. Robert had arranged everything by correspondence through an old contact who still owed him favors. He had a room reserved under a false name, a necessary precaution should anyone recognize him. "Remember," he instructed as he helped Victoria alight, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "You are a respectable widow seeking to invest a small inheritance in commercial ventures. The information came from your late husband, who kept meticulous records. Nothing connects this to me." "I understand." Victoria straightened her shoulders, adopting a posture that perfectly matched the elegant dress. The transformation was remarkable. This was a woman accustomed to drawing rooms and social conventions, not to ruined estates and manual labor. The first merchant was located in a narrow office on a side street, accessed via steep stairs that smelled of paint and tobacco. Mr. Hartley was a corpulent, middle-aged man with carefully combed grey hair and calculating eyes that immediately assessed Victoria from head to toe. "Mrs. Ashworth." He kissed her hand with gallantry that bordered on excessive. "Your letter mentioned commercial information of a lucrative nature." "Precisely." Victoria sat in the chair he offered, accepting tea served by a silent assistant. Robert had remained at the inn, but had spent hours preparing her for this conversation. "My late husband kept extensive records of textile contacts and trade routes. I believe they may be of value to a gentleman in your position." Hartley leaned forward, interest evident. "What kind of information specifically?" Victoria withdrew carefully prepared documents from her purse. Names of primary wool suppliers in the Scottish Highlands, negotiated prices for the next 18 months, details of transport routes that avoid more onerous tariffs, and, she paused strategically, information about a pending agreement between a Bristol consortium and continental producers that, if appropriately anticipated, could yield considerable profits. Hartley's eyes narrowed with thinly disguised greed. "And how much do you desire for such information?" £15. Victoria kept her voice steady, not revealing the nervousness Robert knew she must be feeling. 15? Hartley leaned back, feigning disinterest. "That is a substantial sum for unverified information." "Then, verify it." Victoria lifted her chin slightly, a gesture of aristocratic defiance that clearly surprised the merchant. "The names and dates are all verifiable. If you find any inaccuracy, you will pay nothing. But if they are correct, as I know they are, £15 is a bargain for the commercial advantage they will provide." The negotiation stretched for over an hour, Hartley attempting to reduce the price, Victoria holding firm with arguments Robert had taught her. Finally, they agreed on £13, with immediate payment in gold coins that Hartley reluctantly counted onto the table. When Victoria emerged from the office, the relief on her face was palpable. She found Robert waiting on the corner, as agreed, and practically ran to him. £13, she whispered, pressing the purse against her chest. He was utterly disagreeable, but he accepted the terms. Pride warmed Robert's chest. "You negotiated magnificently. Edmund would have been impressed." Something painful crossed her face at the mention of her late husband, but it passed quickly. "We still need more. The other 2 merchants. One is in a meeting until late afternoon. The other—" Robert consulted the pocket watch Victoria had lent him. "Should be available now." Mr. Preston operated from a significantly more elegant establishment. a vast warehouse near the docks, where imported fabrics were stored before distribution. He was a younger man than Hartley, perhaps 40 years old, with polished manners that barely disguised a sharp commercial acumen. Negotiation with Preston proved more challenging. He asked detailed questions that tested Victoria's knowledge, forcing her to improvise using information Robert had supplied. There were moments when Robert, observing from a carriage parked across the street, was sure she would be exposed. But Victoria maintained her composure, deflecting questions she couldn't answer, while emphasizing verifiable details that proved the legitimacy of the information. £10, Preston finally offered. It is my best offer. Victoria hesitated, and Robert watched her doing mental calculations. 13 from Hartley, 10 from Preston, plus whatever they managed to sell of the tools and jewelry. Would it be enough? Almost, but not quite. £12, Victoria countered. And I will include additional information about a silk supplier in Lyon who is currently trading below market value due to urgent family circumstances. Preston studied her for a long moment. From where does your family obtain such specific information? My husband travelled extensively before his death. The lie came out smoothly, practiced during the journey. He maintained correspondence with merchants in multiple countries. I only recently discovered his records while organising his affairs. Finally, Preston nodded. £12. But if any information proves false, I shall return to claim a refund. That will not be necessary. Victoria accepted the coins with a dignity that would have made royalty envious. The third merchant, Mr. Wickham, received them only briefly late in the afternoon. An elderly man with brusque manners, he dismissed half the information Victoria offered as already known. But he showed particular interest in details about shipping tariffs that Robert had included specifically to attract the attention of an experienced merchant. £5, Wickham declared bluntly. Not a penny more. The information has value, but it is limited. Victoria looked at Robert through the window, indecision clear in her eyes. £5 would bring them to £30 in total, still insufficient. But it was already growing dark, and they had a long journey back in the morning. Robert made a subtle gesture of assent. They needed to accept what they could get. Very well, Victoria agreed, concealing her disappointment. £5. They met at the inn as night fell over Bath. Victoria counted the coins on his room's table 3 times, as if the tally could magically increase the total. £30. Defeat weighed in her voice. We still need 10 to reach the minimum partial payment. Robert watched her, admiring the strength that kept her focused, even in the face of disappointing numbers. Edmund's tools and the jewellery, how much do you realistically believe they will yield? Perhaps £8 if we are fortunate. Victoria collapsed into a chair, exhaustion finally overcoming the adrenaline that had sustained her throughout the day. And that means selling everything, including the pieces I intended to keep for the girls. No, the word came out firm, decisive. We will not sell their inheritances. There is another way. Victoria raised her eyes, cautious hope kindling on her face. What way? Robert moved to the window, looking out at the illuminated streets of Bath. What he was about to suggest was dangerous, potentially disastrous. But he was out of conventional options. I have a contact in Bath, a man who owes me a considerable favour from years ago when I helped him avoid a financial scandal that would have ruined his family. He turned to face her. He has the means and, more importantly, discretion. I can ask him for a loan of £15. A loan we cannot repay, Victoria pointed out pragmatically. Not immediately, but if we can gain an extension of time through the partial payment, we will have months to produce a spring harvest to increase the property's value through repairs, and if my plan for London bears fruit. He left the sentence unfinished. Victoria rose, moving closer to him until they were so near he could feel the warmth of her presence. This contact, will he recognize you? Will it be dangerous? Lord Ashford will recognize me, yes, but he is an honourable man. If I appeal to the favour he owes me, he will maintain silence about my whereabouts. Robert hesitated. But there is risk. There always is. Then we shall go together. It was not a request, but a declaration. If there is risk, we will face it together. The determination in her stirred something in Robert, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and a deeper emotion he dared not name. Without thinking, he reached for her face, fingers tracing softly the line of her jaw. "When this is over," he whispered, "when the threats are neutralized and your property is secure, we need to have a different conversation about what is growing between us." Victoria covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "I know, but first survival. Afterwards." A small, fragile smile touched her lips. "Afterwards, we shall see what future we can build from the ruins." Robert leaned in, allowing himself only the briefest of kisses on her forehead, a promise and a plea simultaneously. Then he pulled back, breaking the moment before it could become something neither of them was fully prepared to confront. "Tomorrow morning, we will visit Lord Ashford. Then we return to Thornfield and prepare a presentation for Charles's representatives." He forced a confidence into his voice that he did not entirely feel. "This will work, Victoria. It has to work." She nodded, believing because she needed to believe. And that night, in separate rooms at the inn, both lay awake, thinking not only of the immediate challenges, but of the impossible future they were beginning to dare imagine together. Lord Ashford's residence was situated on one of Bath's most elegant streets, an imposing edifice of pale stone with Grecian columns that proclaimed ancient wealth and refinement. Robert observed it from the carriage with a mixture of apprehension and determination, aware that each step towards that door increased the risk of exposure. Victoria beside him briefly squeezed his hand, conveying silent courage. "There is still time to reconsider," she offered, though both knew there was none. "There is not." Robert adjusted the cravat he wore to partially obscure his features. "Ashford is our best chance. Perhaps the only one." They descended together, presenting themselves to the butler as Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, names they had chosen during their sleepless night. The servant examined them with a trained eye that assessed social status through 1,000 small details. Victoria's mourning dress, though of superior quality, showed subtle wear. Robert's posture, aristocratic despite his simple clothes, created an intriguing contradiction. "Lord Ashford does not receive visitors without prior appointment," the butler declared with polite coolness. "I understand perfectly." Robert kept his voice low, disguising his familiar timbre. "But I ask that you deliver this to his lordship." He extended a sealed envelope containing only 3 words written in his characteristic handwriting. "Birmingham, August, 1843. The butler hesitated, but the urgency implied in the cryptic message seemed to persuade him. He disappeared into the house, leaving them waiting in the ornate vestibule. Victoria observed the ancestral portraits on the walls, fingers nervously smoothing the folds of her dress. "Birmingham," she whispered curiously, "where I prevented Ashford's son from signing a disastrous contract that would have ruined him." Robert kept his eyes fixed on the staircase. The young man was in love, blind to the obvious scheme. "Ashford swore he would be eternally in my debt." Quick footsteps echoed in the upper corridor. Lord Ashford descended the stairs with a speed ill-suited to his advanced age, white hair dishevelled, blue eyes wide with shock. He stopped abruptly upon seeing Robert, recognition and alarm crossing his aristocratic features. "Sinclair." The name came out in a harsh whisper. "By heavens, man, all London seeks you. What folly has brought you to my door?" "Desperation, your lordship." Robert kept his voice low. "And the hope that your word still holds value." Ashford studied him for a long moment, then transferred his attention to Victoria. "And who is this lady accompanying a fugitive? Someone who does not deserve to be dragged into scandal." Robert positioned himself slightly in front of Victoria, an instinctive protective gesture, but who generously offered help when I had no one. Something in his tone or words seemed to touch the old lord. Ashford sighed heavily. "Come in, quickly, before anyone sees you." He guided them through corridors to a private library, dismissing the butler with a brusque order not to be disturbed. Only when the door closed securely did he turn to face them fully. "Explain yourselves, and this had better be worth my while." Robert narrated the story in concise, precise phrases. Charles Pemberton's betrayal, His own ruin, the desperate flight that had led him to Thornfield, the current threat against Victoria's property, the plan to buy time through a partial payment. Ashford listened in silence, fingers interlaced beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. When Robert finished, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Victoria, who had remained quiet until then, finally spoke, her voice firm despite her evident nervousness. "I know this puts your lordship in a difficult position, but I have 2 young daughters who depend on me. The property is all we possess, and Robert—" She paused, searching for words. "Robert has worked tirelessly to help us, expecting nothing in return. He deserves a chance to clear his name." Ashford transferred his penetrating gaze to her. "Are you aware of the danger associated with this man, madam? Of the accusations against him?" "I am." Victoria met his eyes without flinching. "And I am also aware of his character, which I have come to know through his actions, not rumors. Sometimes, your lordship, the world judges precipitously without knowing the complete truth." An unexpected smile touched the old lord's lips. "You speak as my late wife used to speak. She too believed in judging people by their present actions, not merely their past errors." He moved to his desk, taking keys from a locked drawer. "Sinclair, you owe me a more complete explanation of this fraud. Names, dates, everything you recall." For the next hour, Robert meticulously described the financial manipulations Charles had executed. Ashford asked pointed questions, his mind still sharp despite his age. Gradually, a thoughtful expression replaced his initial skepticism. "Pemberton." He pronounced the name with evident distaste. "I know the family. The father was an honorable man, but the son always had a questionable reputation in certain circles." He drummed his fingers on the table. "If what you say is true, and I believe it is, then a considerable injustice has been committed. But proving it will require time and resources I do not possess," Robert completed bitterly. "Perhaps." Ashford opened a small safe, withdrawing a pouch of coins. "Here are £20, not as a loan, Sinclair, but as partial repayment of the debt I incurred when you saved my son from similar ruin." He raised a hand when Robert began to protest. "Listen to me, these conditions have attachments. First, you will use this money exclusively to protect this lady's property and her daughters. Second, when you go to London to investigate Pemberton, you will do so under my discreet protection. I have contacts who can open doors that would remain closed to a fugitive." Hope ignited in Robert's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "Your lordship, this is—" "It is pragmatism," Ashford cut him off brusquely. "If Pemberton truly orchestrated a fraud of this magnitude and allowed you to bear the blame, then it is not merely your reputation at stake, but the integrity of the entire commercial system. Men like him destroy the trust that takes generations to build." He turned to Victoria. "Madame, I assure you that I will personally supervise Sinclair's efforts in London. He will not be imprudent under my watch." Victoria rose, moving towards Ashford with a grace that recalled her own aristocratic lineage. "I am deeply grateful, your lordship. Your kindness will not be forgotten." "Kindness be damned," the old lord smiled faintly. "It is simply a recognition that the world needs more people willing to risk themselves for others, not fewer. Now go, quickly. The less time Sinclair remains visible in Bath, the better." The journey back to Thornfield passed in a whirlwind of planning. With the £30 from Bath and the 20 from Ashford, they possessed £50, more than enough for the required partial payment. Victoria would sell only the less sentimental tools, keeping the girls' inheritances intact. And Robert, under Ashford's protection, could finally investigate Charles properly without immediate risk of arrest. "When will you depart for London?" Victoria asked when Thornfield finally appeared in the distance, its familiar chimneys visible against the late afternoon sky. "In 3 days, Ashford will send a letter of introduction and arrangements for safe accommodation." Robert observed her, memorizing every detail of her profile against the golden light. "But first, we will present the payment to Charles's representatives. We need to secure an extension of time before anything else." Margaret and Charlotte ran to meet them when the carriage stopped, their faces lit with relief. Charlotte threw herself into Victoria's arms, while Margaret held Robert's hand with surprising strength. "I thought you might not come back," the girl admitted softly, a rare vulnerability showing through her usual composure. Robert knelt to her level, meeting those brown eyes so like her mother's. "I will always return, Margaret. This is my home now, too." The words came out spontaneously, a truth he had barely begun to consciously recognize. But there, with the child holding his hand and Victoria watching with a soft expression, Robert understood completely. Thornfield was no longer just a temporary refuge. It was where he belonged, where he had built something real from the ashes of his former life. That night, after the girls fell asleep, exhausted from the excitement of stories from Bath, Victoria found Robert in the barn where he was checking recent repairs. The full moon illuminated the interior through the open doors, creating silvery patterns on the hay. "You told Margaret this is your home." Victoria spoke softly, approaching until they were separated only by a narrow space. "Did you mean it?" "Every word." Robert turned to face her fully. "Victoria, when this began, I thought I was simply surviving, working in exchange for shelter until I could move on. But somewhere in the past few weeks, everything changed. You changed everything." "Robert." Her voice trembled slightly. "Let me finish." He held her hands, his thumb tracing soft circles over her knuckles. "I know it's complicated. I know there's still much to resolve, that my past remains a threat. But when everything is settled, when Charles is exposed and your property is secure, I would like your permission to court you properly, to be not just a temporary worker, but a permanent part of this family." Tears gleamed in Victoria's eyes, reflecting the moonlight. "The girls already love you, and I—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "I had decided I would never again allow anyone close, that I would protect my heart as fiercely as I protect my daughter's. But you dismantled those defenses without even trying." "So is that a yes?" Hope and fear mingled in his voice. "It is a promise to consider." Victoria smiled through her tears. "When you return from London, when the threats are neutralized and we can breathe without constant fear, then we will have this conversation properly. But Robert—" She reached for his face, fingers tracing softly his jawline. "Come back to me. Come back safe." Robert covered her hand with his, turning to kiss her palm. "I promise. I have too many reasons to return now." They remained like that for a suspended moment, aware of a line they were about to cross. Then Robert leaned in slowly, giving her time to retreat, but Victoria met him halfway, their lips uniting in a kiss that held promises of a future they barely dared to imagine. When they finally separated, both trembled slightly. Victoria leaned against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beats of his heart. "Edmund was my first love," she whispered in the darkness, "and despite his errors I shall always cherish him. But you, Robert, you are something different, something I did not expect but now cannot imagine losing." "You will not lose me." He held her close, his chin resting on her hair. "I will return, I will prove my innocence, and we will build a life together. You, I, Margaret, and Charlotte. A real family, not just one of circumstance." The moon continued its journey across the sky as they remained embraced, two survivors who had found hope in each other. The path ahead remained uncertain, even dangerous. But for the first time since their respective falls, both believed that the future could hold more than just survival. It could hold joy, love, and a new beginning they both desperately deserved. When they finally separated and returned to the house, it was with a renewed understanding. The coming days would bring considerable challenges, a temporary farewell that neither desired. But they would also bring resolution, justice, and if all went according to plan, the freedom to finally build a future without the shadows of the past obscuring every step. And as Robert watched Victoria ascend the stairs towards the room where her daughters slept, he knew with absolute certainty that he would fight with every fiber of his being to make that future a reality. For the girls who had accepted him when no one else would, for the property that had become his home, and for the extraordinary woman who had taught him that redemption came not from fleeing the past, but from facing it with courage and building something better from the ruins. The journey to London awaited, but now Robert faced it not as a desperate man with nothing to lose, but as a man with everything to gain and a family awaiting his return. And that difference made all the difference in the world.